So I go way back at NASCAR, and if you look at, we used to race at Rockingham, North Carolina, North Wilkesboro, North Carolina, and we'd kind of go from Daytona and race, really around North Carolina, South Carolina. Attendance was challenged because we're in the same markets, cold weather, so we went to Vegas, we went to California, and things were booming. But the messaging with how we did that, we deserted our fan base. We just popped up, see you later, we went to Vegas. Ryan probably saw that. And for a while it was good because you sold out some of those events. But your fans that had been with you for a long time kind of said, this is not the NASCAR I used to know.
Hello and welcome to this week's episode of SBJ's On Stage. I'm your host, Taylor Bloom. Today's episode comes from SBJ's National Sports Forum in St. Louis, where Steve O'Donnell, president of NASCAR, sat down with Ryan McGee, senior writer at ESPN, for a fireside chat on the future of the sport. Recorded on February 23rd, this conversation explores how NASCAR is evolving its identity, adapting to new fans, honoring lifelong fans, adjusting to new media dynamics, and positioning itself for long-term success. It's a candid look at leadership, innovation, and what it takes to keep a legacy sport moving forward. Let's go on stage.
Great to be here, everybody, in sunny, warm St. Louis. A quick reminder before we get started, there will be a NASCAR event just over the river.
Well, I saw Curtis Francois right here. Yep.
Over in, it'd be, I think, September 13th. And I think those of us who, I was there for the very first event at what we called the Gateway Raceway.
Gateway originally, yeah, absolutely.
And I love the fact that it's now in the mix, and we're certainly going to talk about scheduling. But, all right, OD, as we like to call you, we've been around each other for a long time.
We have.
The first time I remember seeing you, you were being yelled at in Victory Lane.
Happens often.
This is the hat guy. So if you watch a NASCAR event, when Indiana wins the national championship football, they don't make Kurt Signetti stand there and wear hats. But that was your foray into, that's how I remember you starting in NASCAR. How did you get started, and how does the hat guy become the sixth president of NASCAR?
Yeah, it's pretty, like Howie was saying, just being around good people. And I think had a great opportunity. I worked in minor league baseball around Ryan, right, for a while. Got to do a lot of cool things, but entry-level job at NASCAR. And it was a job that you're the hat guy, you do Victory Lane, pre-race, a lot of different jobs. And the good news, bad news with that is you better be able to get along with the head of security who's in Victory Lane, and probably the driver, the owner, and the CEO who's coming in as well to congratulate their driver. So you get to know a lot of people quickly. That's good. If you do a poor job, they talk about you a lot, but it was good for me. I had some great mentors and was able to parlay that into a long career at NASCAR.
All right, so I want to touch real quick on minor league baseball. I got my start in minor league baseball. I wrote a book about it. I pay out-of-state tuition.
Bestseller.
Y'all please buy it for me. But you started in minor league baseball. I think you and I both did the same thing where we went to the winter meetings. Kind of reminds me of this. And you're out there like looking for a job. What was your experience and what was your job in minor league baseball?
So my first experience, if you can believe, myself and a college buddy went out to El Paso, Texas, and it was a minor league baseball seminar. It was a 3-day event, much like this, network, and it was a place to potentially interview for a job. Unbeknownst to us, the interview was the last day at 4 o'clock, and one of the guys got up and said, anybody who's here to try and get a job, come on up front. They gave you a microphone, and you had 1 minute to talk about yourself. And it was probably the most embarrassing thing we've ever done because the entire room looked forward to this every year just to make fun of the people who came out there. But it was great. I mean, you got to meet people, parlayed that into an internship, worked in Daytona Beach in Orlando for the Cubs affiliate. And for me, minor league baseball, you got to do everything. You pulled the tarp when it rained, you sold tickets, you ran security, you did game operations, so you had an opportunity, you wrote press releases. You had the opportunity to do everything and kind of find out what you liked. The challenging part of it, as you looked up, the general managers, at least when I was in minor league baseball, were probably max age of 35. And to me, it seemed like the greatest job in history, and I couldn't understand why no one was retiring doing this job. And then you realize, I think 7-day homestands, I think I made $13,000. Wasn't all about money, but it's a very challenging job. But would never trade that for my life because the experiences you got, the people you got to know, and he wrote a great book about it, and it's perfectly said about what matters in terms of getting to know people.
So I ended up covering NASCAR for ESPN. My first year on the road was 1996, which I think was your first year on the payroll at NASCAR. I went to ESPN in Connecticut right out of college. I wanted to cover college football and these things, and then they found out I was from Rockingham, North Carolina, and I was the only person in the state of Connecticut that sounded like this. And I realized an opportunity. Like I didn't know as much as they thought I did about NASCAR, but I certainly knew more than they did.
Yep.
I think our stories are very similar. We certainly grew up around it. We knew it. You're aware of it. But how did you spot an opportunity within a sport that was exploding when you and I both arrived in the mid-90s?
It was. When I look back in 96, it was exploding, but if you looked at NASCAR, we had, I think, 40 people total in the organization. It's a family-run business then. It still is, but you had the opportunity at that point to be involved in everything. And so I've seen it go from 40 people to 1,200 now, a booming industry. I've seen some ups and downs. But for me getting in, it was more about the opportunity in sports. Didn't come in and say what Howie said, I really want to be in sports, just give me a chance. I knew that it was an emerging business, and it was something that at the time was just kind of south, and had the opportunity to really grow. And entry level travel, it's like this fits everything I want to do, and was given a shot.
So for folks that don't know, NASCAR was founded in December 1948. There's a really famous picture at the Streamline Hotel, which is still there, motel there in Daytona, the ebony room upstairs, and there's this very smoky picture of a bunch of short track guys from around the country, and the man you see at the head of the table is Bill France. And Bill France's son, Bill France Jr., took over as chairman in the 1970s. Jim France, the younger son, is still chairman to this day. It's unique that sport is because it is, as you mentioned, a family business. What is that like, learning from and going through this transition that you've had where that family's still there, but you work with Lisa France Kennedy, who is the daughter of Bill Jr., and you work with Ben Kennedy, her son. It's so unique, this sport, because of that, right?
It is, and I think there's been a ton of opportunities for people. There's also some challenges, right? But if you look at the sport, and where it is today, Howie talked about the investment in sport and betting on the long game, and there's so much interest in sports long term. So, private equity, a lot of interest in our race teams as well. But if you just take NASCAR from still a family-owned business and look at where we are in the sports landscape, it's a pretty cool story in terms of where we're competing. That does not mean to say that, hey, we're good and we're going to stay that way. I think there's a lot of interest in the sport for potential people to come in and take a look, see how they could elevate the sport as well. But it's given me an opportunity to, the door's always open when you have an idea to come in. That's good and bad because, Jim France, I'll give you a quick story with Jim. Jim's now, I think, 82. I used to work in competition, and we had our qualifying session in California, and we looked really bad. The cars were terrible. We were backing out in qualifying. Clint Boyer got on live on Fox TV and said, this is an abomination. NASCAR doesn't know what they're doing. So the phone rings Monday morning, and Jim, hey, Steve, what are we doing about qualifying? I said, well, Jim, we're all over it. We're going to get through Bristol next week. We're going to go to Dover. Got a plan. Okay. What would you do if this was a safety concern? I said, oh, Jim, we'd fix it, fix it right away. What would you do if we looked stupid? I said, well, we'd fix it. Well, we look stupid, pal. And I was like, all right, get it fixed. So, he is constantly on things that he just grew up in the business, and the family grew up in it, grew up on the details. Sometimes that presents challenges. If any of you have been in family-owned businesses, a little more scared of change. So it's been our job to really push some of those things and push some new initiatives.
Well, to me, that has always struck me as the most difficult challenge, which is this idea of, so I mentioned I was editor-in-chief at NASCAR, now it's NASCAR Productions. And you and I always compare the room to when you cut a tree and you look at those rings.
Yep.
And the center is over here, and then there's the other rings. In the mid-2000s, you and I were the other rings. We would be in these meetings, and Steve would be on one wall, and I'd be on one wall, and everyone who mattered was in the middle of the room. But the challenge then is the same as it is now, which is this idea, kind of like dealing with the France family, of pushing into the future, but also making sure your roots are still in the ground. Because there were times, and you and I were in the meetings, where they kind of ripped those roots out of the ground. How do you balance that?
It's a great question, and really what we're trying to move forward with. So if you look at where we're going with our brand campaign and the sport, we probably chased a few too many things trying to be like other sports. And don't get me wrong, and I think one of the things is we all learn from other sports what they're doing, things that they can put in place that we can learn from. But we assume that our kind of hardcore fans would stay with us and newer fans would jump in to take a look at things. Like we had a championship format that came down to one race. And if you look at our hardcore race fans, they did not like it at all. They didn't understand how you could race for 35 weeks, roll the dice for one race, something could happen, and that was our championship format, and it was for a long time. And instead of new fans coming in, they did not understand it. I'm a big golf fan. I struggle with the FedEx Cup points. I watch the majors, and so when we looked in the mirror, we had kind of created that system. And so we're embracing kind of who we are and what we're doing and being proud of who we have in the sport. And instead of chasing certain segments and certain markets, just showcasing who's in the sport. We put out I think something on X yesterday, I think it was, and it was a photo of Michael Jordan and Brad Daugherty in the North Carolina huddle. And those two guys finished 1-2 in the Daytona 500 as car owners. That's a pretty cool story, and we don't tell that story enough. And so embracing who we have, Daniel Suarez coming up from Mexico, becoming an American citizen, competing at the highest level. I think he finished 5th yesterday when we were in Atlanta. So, telling those stories and getting different groups of people to take a look at NASCAR, once they do, we think they're going to become fans for life.
This has felt like a very pivotal year in the 2026 season. I always go back to maybe 2001 when there was a new TV contract and all these things. Did it feel like that for you? Because the energy at Daytona, and I was there for SportsCenter a couple weeks ago, the energy for Daytona, it's always the best. I always say that, with all due respect to my employer, the happiest place on earth is pit lane at Daytona right before, the race starts. That energy was there, but it also felt a little bit different. Did you feel that as we roll into what feels like a pivotal, transitional kind of year for the sport?
I did, and Ryan, Ryan and I have talked. We had a difficult kind of 18 months, right? Found ourselves in a federal courtroom, facing off against Michael Jordan, and if you're a kid like me in 1987 wearing Air Jordans, and then you find yourself across from him in a courtroom. It was a surreal moment, not a place I'd ever recommend people want to be. But we came out of that, and we came out of it in a good place, a place where I believe the teams now can have some long-term value. And one of the things that Ryan's referencing is over the last, I'd say, even 3 to 5 years, if you went to a race, you kind of had the team owners, the drivers, the tracks, sponsors, and we all were kind of doing our own thing, and no real vision to where the sport wanted to go. And the opportunity now is we're going into this season really with no contractual, obligations out in front of us, no lawsuits, no COVID. We can just talk about how cool NASCAR racing is. And it's an opportunity for us to bring the industry together and talk about the art of what could be. And if you look at NASCAR, the sponsors that are involved, the people that are involved, the sky's the limit in terms of what we could do, but we're our own worst enemies sometimes. We're too insular. And to grow the sport, get outside of our little bubble, I think the opportunity's there. Daytona was a great start. The goal for me is when we get to Miami on race 36, that same energy and momentum needs to be there.
There's a new ad campaign, marketing brand campaign. I actually was going through my backpack earlier and I found earplugs that they sell on NASCAR. Hell yeah.
Yep.
Like that's what we're going for,
That's
right?
what we're going for.
And there's all this energy around that. Is that the idea of tapping back into? Because at the end of the day, I tell people this all the time. Because we live in that world, I think are very insular. But at the end of the day, race cars are really cool. Is that the message?
Yeah, everybody likes to race at some point in your life, right? And we tend to just talk about, Daytona. If you leave Daytona, the podcasts are about the rules package, fuel mileage, who did what. There's no bigger picture about where we're going. You had a guy named Cletus McFarland in the truck race who's a YouTube influencer who spent the better part of 2 years just racing dirt cars, doing different things, and has brought in an entirely new audience to him, creating some controversy. Is he ready to race in a national series? You know, he's in a truck right now. He crashed, unfortunately. But the eyeballs he's bringing, younger demos taking a look at it, I think our drivers can see this and realize that, you know, it's not just about the traditional media. I love Ryan, but also influencers coming and taking or taking, you know, a look at NASCAR and letting them put content out that we may have not been comfortable with 5 years ago. That's a big thing for the sport, and so we're going to embrace that and see where we can go.
Is that part of that balance that we're talking about? So the Cars movie has an anniversary this year. There was a big Cars activation in the infield, and you know, I'm a Disney adult. And all of a sudden, I saw these Disney influencers were all around the car. And they're surrounded by old school NASCAR fans who were taking pictures with Greg Biffle's car.
Yes.
You know, is this the balance that we're talking about?
It's the balance. So I go way back at NASCAR, and if you look at, we used to race at Rockingham, North Carolina, North Wilkesboro, North Carolina, and we'd kind of go from Daytona and race, you know, really around North Carolina, South Carolina. Attendance was challenged because we're in the same markets, cold weather, so we went to Vegas, we went to California, and things were booming. But the messaging with how we did that, we deserted our fan base. We just popped up, see you later, we went to Vegas. Ryan probably saw that. And for a while it was good because you sold out some of those events, but your fans that had been with you for a long time kind of said, this is not the NASCAR I used to know. And so now what you're seeing us do is, we put a race in the LA Coliseum. We're going to race in San Diego on the Navy base. But we're also going to put a points race at North Wilkesboro. We're going to a short track and kind of going back to, you know, where the locals race and making sure that we improve that facility. So we're trying to balance that message of, yes, we can introduce the sport to new fans, but here's how we got here, and having fans understand, you know, what the sport's all about. You know, we came from bootleggers who were racing, you know, and it's kind of a cool story when you look at it, and we shouldn't be afraid of that, but then modernize it and showcase where we want to go as a sport. And
there was a time, and I'm talking about in the mid-2000s when you and I were in these meetings I'm talking about, my job was to pitch TV show ideas to networks and write scripts, and they're like, don't use the word moonshine. Right? No country music.
Yep.
And what they would say all the time, well, the core audience will just stick around. And that's the lesson, which is some of them did not. Some of them did, but some of them did not. And now it's tapping back into that. Talk about, I think, to me, the biggest catalyst behind changing the championship point system and going back to what used to be the new system, but then it became the old system.
Yeah, it was really, and I don't want to get too inside baseball or inside NASCAR, but when you looked at our championship format, we've got some young drivers coming up through the system who, in the racing community, are superstars. Kyle Larson, Christopher Bell, Ryan Blaney's of the world, who were performing at a high level, but got down to 1, 6, 7, 8 races a year, and went to a championship format where it was a one race, winner take all. If the car had a problem, if someone else got in an accident, they didn't win a championship. And the format was such that every 3 races we kind of had a cutoff, and we went from 16 to 12. To 8 to 4.
It was a bracket.
It was a bracket.
Right.
But what we found happening is Ryan's job was, if you went to the race at Bristol, instead of talking about who won and who just kicked everybody's ass in that race, we were talking about who finished 23rd and moved on to the next round. And no one cared. We weren't building stars. We weren't talking about winners. So part of this was we wanted young racers who were coming up through the system to be celebrated for winning. And then we wanted that 5, 6, 7-year-old who's getting in a go-kart to say, I could go Formula One racing, IndyCar racing, NASCAR racing. I want to be a NASCAR superstar. And I don't want to be part of a one-race deal where my career could be in jeopardy in terms of how many wins and championships. So we're going back to, celebrating who we are and celebrating the guys who are out there winning and winning championships.
How difficult was that stretch starting, we were all at Daytona, had an amazing race weekend, a moment with Ryan Newman that to me is the moment that proved that the modern safety advances are working, and then COVID dropped a month later. And NASCAR was the first national sport to come back to the racetrack. And I covered races standing in the parking lot because I wasn't allowed inside. But the machinations of that was also the summer that Steve Phelps, who deserves a lot of credit for a lot of the things that we're talking about here, your coworker, the first commissioner in NASCAR, banned the Confederate flag from the track grounds at a testy social time. You can Google Bubba Wallace in the summer of 2020 and find all that. All of that, and that led into a lot of other things. It kind of bracketed by this antitrust lawsuit that you talked about in federal court. How difficult was it, and what is the net positive now that you're on the other side of all that?
Well, it was extremely difficult, but I think with any challenge, right, you always hear you learn so much. And so the Ryan Newman thing, for us, if you want to go on YouTube, it was a horrific accident. Since Dale Earnhardt's passing, we have not had a fatality. Our safety efforts are incredible. It's a dangerous sport, though. Anything can happen any weekend. The word we got in race control was that he was not breathing. And, this was going to be a moment in the sport where, here we go, right? And I was around when Dale Earnhardt passed away. It was a very difficult time, and so that was challenging, and it was great to see, obviously, the net result with that, but a lot of safety and innovation came from that. COVID for us was an opportunity, and it was, obviously a long day for everybody, but we had 8 people who came to work in Daytona. We lived in Florida, so a little looser rules there. We came to the office every single day. And our goal was get back to racing, be the first to be on track, put your gaming out, showcase iRacing on television, and just take some risks and see what we could do. We were on the phone with governors every day. How can we race? What can we do? Learned a lot, and we're able to get back and go racing. It wasn't perfect, but I think it proved to us internally of how quick we could do some things. And probably most importantly, Ryan, was decisions that probably would have taken us 4 years, took 2 months. And that has accelerated how we think about everything we do right now. We want to be smart and be informed, but it really was the art of the possibility of what could happen. The championship format's an example of that. The brand campaign of, let's go, let's be part of this, is part of that. So we're going to be a lot quicker. We're going to be smart about it, but we're going to take some risks. We're not always going to get it right, but be proud of who we are.
And during that time, you guys were receiving phone calls from the NFL, from Major League Baseball, from the NBA, like, how are you doing this? And they took a lot of that. They stripped you for parts.
They did. No, but it was good. And we share a lot of ideas with all the other leagues, and it's great. I mean, we came out of, we had an opening race this year at Bowman Gray, which is a little track around a football field at Winston-Salem State. It was the first race I've ever been a part of where it sleeted, so we were in a lot of trouble. But what came out of that was a meeting with Goodyear in Daytona Beach about, hey, can we put snow tires on these things? And CEO of Goodyear said, hey, that's our biggest seller right now, if you guys can make this happen. So the next call is going to be, and I think Gary Bettman will be here, I think tomorrow, the next call is going to be to the NHL or college, and let's go race around put a hockey game together, and let's go race around it and create a big event. So I think there's a lot of opportunities to do some things. It'll take some time, but those are the types of ideas we want to beat up.
I want to ask you some more questions, and I think everybody in the room would like to know more about your path to get to where you are. Yeah. But scheduling fascinates me. And maybe it's because, I was around when we had the speedway boom in the late 90s, and when you were talking about moving to California and leaving some other places. I'm a bitter Rockingham native. Yep. Thank you for bringing it back, by the way. But the scheduling algorithm in your brain of this balance, for folks that don't know, in June, NASCAR is going to race on the naval base in San Diego, like on runways next to aircraft carriers, yep, on the 250th anniversary of the Navy in the United States, but also is going back to Rockingham, yeah, with 2 of the national series. And as you said, a points race at North Wilkesboro, which was returning to the dirt. That place was gone, and now it is back. It's like digging the Titanic up, and figuring out how to go sailing again. The balance of scheduling, and you made some headlines recently talking about maybe being aggressive with what the calendar looks like.
Yeah.
How much time do you think about it and the discussions, and what goes into that for you?
A lot. I mean, it dictates kind of our whole, media, what their involvement will be in the future. So we've got great media partners right now, but we're already thinking about, that next renewal, which is, 6 years away. And, we're out there on display, right, for the new media partners or our current partners. And it's how many races, what's the mix of network versus cable versus streaming. There's so many different things to think about. And then when do you race, right? We've made some moves. Typically, we used to be Sunday at noon, Sunday at 1, Sunday at 3, Saturday night. You're all over the place chasing ratings, but sometimes that doesn't work for who's coming to the races. So for us, we've got a long season, and I think everybody says it's too long at times, but that's what people buy. Sponsors love it because they're able to have a platform for 38 weeks. But we're going to look at potential midweek races. What can we do? Experiment a little bit. But the schedule, Curtis is here from Worldwide Technology and track here. One of the things that's important to Curtis is where are we racing 5 years from now, and what's my date? Because what we've done to our track promoters recently is we've moved those a lot, and it presents a real challenge. So the goal for us is 2031, what's the schedule, where are we going, and everybody kind of get behind that and start working towards that goal. That'll take some time, but ultimately that's the goal for us.
Well, and it is a balance because it is staying in touch with your roots, but also moving forward. All right, so I have known you for a really long time.
Sorry about that.
It's okay. And I think we both look at, y'all get there where you look at each other and go, how in the hell did we end up doing what we're doing? Because we have to be nice to each other because we knew each other in our 20s, right?
Yep.
But you lived in Egypt? I don't think I knew this.
I did. I was living in Massachusetts, and I was going into 7th grade. My parents were educators. My dad was a principal. My mom taught. My dad came home one day and said, we're moving. I said, well, where are we going? We're moving to Egypt. I just couldn't believe it. Unbeknownst to me, my dad actually had always wanted to go overseas. If you're an educator, going and working in an international school, housing's paid for, there's no taxes, so there's a lot of benefits. So he had been turned down for a job in Iran earlier, which would have been really wild. But we moved to Egypt. I was miserable the first 2 months. My dad called me in and he said, here's $1,000 to get on a plane. This is my job. Either get on board with this or go live with my sister. And I realized that, wow, what a jerk I was doing. I ended up, it was the highlight of my life. I got to be in an unbelievable country with great people. Instead of going to a state basketball tournament, you would travel to Europe and you'd play, you'd be hosted by a school. There'd be 16 international schools. Went to the same high school as Steve Kerr. His younger brother was my best friend in Egypt. So it was an amazing experience for me. Life lessons about treating people the right way, and I think it's stayed with me forever.
Well, and I will go back to business for a second because there is a push and there's a lot of headlines being made by the NFL about playing so many overseas games. Yep. And people are very divisive about, does the Super Bowl played overseas one day? How important is the international footprint for NASCAR going forward? Because I think the international footprint for NASCAR is probably bigger than anyone realizes outside of the bubble that we all live in. It's
a huge opportunity, and I think certainly, and everyone here is a smart person and uses technology. I mean, I think Bono from U2 said, the guy in Egypt right now is my neighbor. I can be face to face at any moment in time talking to the person just as I can my next door neighbor here. So for NASCAR, we had to take a little bit of a step back in terms of getting the U.S. footprint right. We made some moves that weren't the best, and we've learned from those, and we're seeing the fan base come back. And the next thing is probably Canada. We'd love to be in Canada. But the passion for NASCAR, we have series in Mexico, Canada, Brazil, and Europe right now. And they're smaller series, but emerging stock car series. But the passion, if you go to Brands Hatch in England, we'll have 50,000 people at a race that's, the equivalent of single A baseball. And so it's a big opportunity for us to bring our style of racing. We're not Formula One. We're going to beat and bang. We're going to have some fun. The Europeans like that form of racing. And so if we can do that in a smart way, I think that's something you'll see us really go after over the next 5 years.
The Goodwood Festival of Speed, for folks don't know, is a very rich individual. And he likes to host these race cars on his property. And Richard Petty has gone over there in his 1970 Plymouth, and people have said they like that king more than they like their own king.
Yeah, we went. Jim France had a vision, so he's big in Le Mans. We have the IMSA series, which is part of NASCAR, and he had an idea to bring NASCAR's next-gen car and participate over in Le Mans as a one-off. And a lot of us, to be honest, kind of scoffed at the idea, thought it was a waste of money. And we developed the car with Hendrick Motorsports and went over, and Jimmy Johnson and some others raced. And I've been to France a lot, and it is hard to get people in France to celebrate America. But every time that car went by, it was a standing ovation. And it was unbelievable to us. And it was really a kind of an eye-opener that, hey, we can bring this style of racing and kind of the big, loud car. We got to be within reason, right, with emissions and all that. But it showed that there's an opportunity for us, for sure.
No, the best is it's 1 o'clock in the morning, and it's whew, whew, and then wah. Like, oh yeah, there's the NASCAR ride. Yeah. What you have had the opportunity to be in the room with some legendary figures, certainly in the world of motorsports, but even otherwise. What's the piece of advice or pieces of advice that you carry with you day to day?
I'd say there's a couple. Bill France told me when I was young, I think I might have shown some emotion in a meeting or something, and he pulled me aside and he said, "Son, being pissed off is not a plan." And I kind of said, what is that? And I've taken that with me forever, because especially as you kind of move up and you're lucky enough to move up, people are looking at you and how do you react? And you can certainly be upset with something, but to try and internalize that and really be thinking about the solutions. Because the other part of that is, having been in sports for 30 years, and I'm sure you'll hear this from others, no one goes away. And that's a good thing. So you may go into a meeting. I was with my old boss years ago when I was on the sponsorship side, and we went into a meeting with Pepsi, and we were between Coke and Pepsi, and my old boss, I'm not going to name names, but went in and just said, "We're big bad NASCAR, you're going to pay this, you're going to pay that," and we got a deal, but it was not a good meeting. 2 years later, we were up in Craftsman to renew a deal, and lo and behold, that same CMO from Pepsi was the CMO at Craftsman, and that deal didn't happen. And so, just be nice to people. You can, great advice is work hard and be nice. And those are the people you see a lot of times in sports that, you got to have a certain attitude or anything. But to me, what's worked for me is just be who you are, respect people at all levels, and usually good things will happen.
I always think about Ricky Rudd would talk about racing at Talladega and Daytona, where aerodynamically you're relying on other cars. And Ricky said some young guy will do something to him on lap 7, and he'll put a little imaginary Post-it note over here on the dash. And with about 3 laps to go, he's like, "Who's this? Should I help him?" No. Yeah, because it is, everybody comes back around. Michael Jordan, you mentioned him. Michael Jordan's team, by the way, is 2311. He co-owns that with Denny Hamlin, who, in my opinion, is the greatest driver to never win a championship.
Agreed.
In NASCAR, a 3-time Daytona 500 winner. 2311 has won the first 2 races of this season, the Daytona 500, and then same driver, Tyler Reddick, and their other driver, Bubba Wallace, could have very easily won both those races. This was the team that was involved, or one of the 2 teams across the courtroom. But taking your legal boss hat off and putting your sports fan hat on, I watched Jim France and Michael, everybody in victory lane at Daytona. It is such an out-of-body experience for me to cover him, even when he was mad at me about a column I wrote, but to have an interaction with him. How big is it for the sport, and just for you personally, to have arguably the greatest individual athlete of all time involved in the sport? And not just involved, because you and I have been around long enough to see a lot of people that have come in and invested, celebrities that just vanished very quickly. Michael's in, isn't he?
Michael's in, and the coolest thing, and if there's any NBA personnel in here, I apologize, but one of the coolest things is you've got the NBA All-Star Game going on, and Michael Jordan's there all day Sunday at the Daytona 500. He doesn't want to be known. He's got his place down in the back, hanging out with his buddies. He's there in victory lane. I was in Atlanta yesterday for the race. Michael Jordan's there all day long. He's there in victory lane. And he grew up a fan, and so it's authentic. And so when he's speaking about the sport, it's cool because you can see that passion. And I think that's where, I talked earlier about when we lost our way a little bit. We tried to bring in some influencers or some celebrities. Okay, go away from the country music for this race. We'd have someone else. There's a lot of different genres of music where people are fans of NASCAR. But when you bring in someone who knows nothing about the sport and they're likely interviewed and they say, "I don't know anything about this," and they're out of there, it probably does more damage than good. And so, Michael speaking up, we want to be smart about, we're not going to say, "Hey, we need you in all these interviews." But I think naturally just him showing his passion is fantastic for the sport. And there's a lot of other people, when you look at the sport today, most of the owners were either, former racers or people who had built up the sport. an aging community, but very passionate about the sport. A lot of them have now partnered with private equity or other groups who are in other sports entities, which is a great thing for us. So now when you have a conversation with Jimmy Johnson, Jimmy's got 7-time champion, partnered with Knighthead, who owns, Birmingham over in England, part owners with the Raiders in Las Vegas. So that conversation has now changed from an insular, just NASCAR, to a broader sports and entertainment conversation, which is huge for us. And we are just tapping into that, and I think huge opportunities for us.
Well, and when you were the president of NASCAR, you're not just dealing with 32 franchises. You're dealing with really 40-plus franchises just at the Cup Series level. There's 2 other national series, and it's not only that, everyone's an independent contractor. The driver's an independent contractor. Every team has X number of sponsors. The owners are independent contractors, private equity firms. How do you keep track of all that, and how much of your time is spent getting to know all these people, because the number continues to expand?
It does. So 2 things. So Eric Shanks from Fox, when I first got put into this role, said, your job is simple. And I said, what? He said, you got to get the industry back. And he was right. We had gotten away from having communication with the industry as much as we should have. And so Mike Helton, who's been a longtime mentor of mine, former president of NASCAR, has a sign that he walked into my office as well that says, who needs to know about the decision I just made? And it's a reminder every single time of every decision we make, drivers, teams, tracks, sponsors, you name it, is going to have an effect. I could have a conversation with Curtis that we're going to move his date because it works for him, but I may have totally changed the landscape for the competitors, for our TV partners, and if you don't make those calls and if you do it in a vacuum, that's when trouble happens, and that's when people think you're not listening. So the biggest challenge for me is you're not always going to agree, but if you can at least have the conversation and then come back and explain why you made a decision, there's at least hopefully that level of respect. It gets lonely, right? Not everyone's going to agree with it, but if at least you can say, here's why we did this, and we did listen, it usually has a good outcome.
So how much of the job now is building these communication bridges that you're talking about? Because that many independent contractors, that's a lot of silos, and those silos were pretty staunch, at different periods of time. How much of your job now is getting there? Because it wasn't like this during COVID, but it kind of got away from that. So how do you get everybody now back into the same room and the same conversation, even though everyone's scattered here and yon?
Yeah, I would say that's the majority of the job right now is getting the industry together to talk about where we're going. And so I can say, hey, here's the plan for 2030, but if I haven't communicated that and haven't had buy-in from the stakeholders, when they're asked, they're going to say, I don't know what the sport's doing, I don't know where we're going. And so our job is to bring folks together, get as much input as possible, and then try to get the industry to understand what's possible. Everyone, there's a lot of fans of the sport who are in the sport, which is great, and sometimes they don't see beyond what could be, and I think it's getting them to understand really the art of the possibility is huge for the sport if we can just get everyone kind of focused on where we want to go and that North Star.
All right, we got to hear you on this. The question we all get, if we're fortunate enough to have a job, the job we wanted, or the job that that maybe we didn't want but we have, the question is always, all right, how do I get to do what you're doing? So when people approach you and say, I want to be a motorsports executive, I want to be a commissioner of a league or president of a league, what is your advice to them?
My advice to them is twofold. So if you're in school, most often, and Ryan and I had this discussion earlier about his daughter also, is most people junior year, senior year are afraid to reach out. Or my dad had this contact, or I know so-and-so has a friend. Everyone in sports had the opportunity and was given a name or someone to reach out to. Now, it's your job once you get it to that interview to prove yourself, but do not be afraid to have that conversation. If there's someone in sports who you reach out to and they don't give you the time of day, probably not someone you're going to want to work with or a company you're going to work with. So use those connections as much as you can, and then once you're in the door, it's up to you to get it done.
Yeah, Michael Jordan would say it. Tyler Reddick would say it. Shoot your shot.
Shoot your shot. Exactly right.
All right. Thank y'all so much.
Thanks for listening to this episode of On Stage. If you enjoyed this conversation, be sure to subscribe, leave us a review, and share it with colleagues interested in the future of sports, media, and fan engagement. Here's a thought to take with you. When reinventing a legacy brand, How do you decide what to preserve and what to change? I'd love to hear your perspective. Shoot me a note at tbloom@sportsbusinessjournal.com. We'll be back in 2 weeks with another conversation from the stage featuring leaders shaping the future of sports business. Until next time, stay tuned and stay ahead. This is On Stage.